Right guys, welcome down to what is my first golf lesson in over a decade, and it has been a very, very enlightening experience. I'm down here with Dan Whittaker, who you may have seen on Rick's videos already. Dan is also on YouTube as well, so I'll include the link to his channel in the description below. Check it out, subscribe. Excellent golf coach, and uses a 3D system down here at his studio at High Lee. And it's been a fascinating experience. It's been tricky, as I was explaining to Dan. I've not had a lesson in so long because just trying to find someone who I trusted is a tricky thing. But I know about Dan, I know the stuff that he does, and it's been so interesting, this lesson. I've not had a proper swing lesson in ages, and it's been fascinating. And it's been, I don't really know. You know what, I feel like there's a big weight been lifted off my shoulders, basically, because I now have a better idea of stuff that I need to be working on rather than just thinking about everything myself. It's been
I think what you said as well is, this is for everyone. Can think that we'd all know what we need to do in our own games. The problem is that obviously you're looking at yourself for so long that you see things, but you don't always see them.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
You get used to looking at your own way of doing it, and you don't necessarily see what's going on some of the time because you're so used to seeing that particular picture.
Precisely, because that's something that I've done. I've got stuck in my own, just in my own mold, basically, looking at certain things and keep going back to those things.
Yeah.
And not seeing some of the things which, when have been pointed out in this lesson, they're so obvious.
Yeah.
They're so obvious, but it's just not been there in the forefront of my mind, and it's been a very valuable insight today, not only into my own swing, my own technique, my own ways of thinking about it, but also the 3D system, and exactly what differences that it shows. It is fantastic. Right, shall we talk through it?
Yeah.
What I was doing and what I'm going to do now.
Okay, so we'll start off here. I was on the right hand side of the screen, and the left is the original starting swing. So we noticed the right foot was a little bit too square, and this was obviously putting a lot of pressure and weight on the toes, as we can see here on the pressure plate. It's definitely all on the front of the foot. And then tighten the swing going back, we noticed that from down the line on the left hand side that the hips were not moving back as much as we wanted to, and if anything, they're actually starting to what we call early extend, so actually move a little bit this way. So as we started that backswing, we got the turn, and then as we're getting towards the top, about halfway back, that's moving away from the line. So it doesn't necessarily look miles here, but because it's moving that way, it was actually really affecting how much turn we were able to get in the swing, which was massively noticeable when we went on to this.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is the first swing right here. So we've noticed that hips and shoulders are a little bit open at address, and that's hardly anything, so it really wasn't anything too much to worry about. But what we did notice was as we started to take the club to the top of the backswing, so at the top here, we're at 32 degrees in hip rotation and maxing out there at 86 in terms of the shoulder turn.
Yeah, and that's something which I've noticed before. It's something that I've had a look at to try and change before. But honestly, I thought that my hips were turning so much more than that on the backswing. But again, it was due to setup. It was to do with how I was operating my pelvis throughout the swing. And what I had to feel like I was doing, which we'll get onto in a moment, it was so odd.
The other bit we had was also that you were really starting to move, loading over to the right side, and then we could see that so much more towards the target. So you see the top numbers, we've off the shoulders and the hip number just for a moment. We could see here that the spine, you're moving away from the target, which is what you want to be doing, so you're creating that movement and load. We could see here, definitely starting to really move towards the target in that towards the top of the backswing, and then everything went towards, so on the way down, and that impact, it was only 1 degree away, so tour average would be about 10 to 18, so it's quite a long way in terms of off in where we were looking at with that. So have a look at the video how that actually looked. What we could see is that left shoulder was definitely not starting to get across much. We could actually see it was starting to lift a little bit here, so it was starting to go upwards, the head goes up a little, and now the upper body leans towards the target. Okay, and what we've just seen there is that actually the shoulder turn was probably finishing about here. Okay, which will be very interesting when we have a look at this in a minute, and you'll be able to tell them what your feeling was on that length swing.
It was, and then this was quite nice actually, because this is something I know that I've done, but all that I've ever done to try and counteract this is not so much thinking about the hips, really focusing more on what I'm doing with my arms, just trying to almost drop them a little bit lower. But that in itself would not have done the job. It wouldn't have solved anything, you know. And it is again just one of those things, looking at things through someone else's eyes. It was so invaluable, really was.
The one thing that you were saying there is you were saying about the arms. It was because the pelvis was going this way, the way of the arrow. We could then see at the top the arms quite steep relative to the shoulders, but that was all because the hips went forwards, which then tilted that upper body towards the target, so the arm had to then go upwards. And then in that transition we saw everything was together, and then kind of a little bit chasing through the ball, quite a high right shoulder.
Yeah.
Should we show them what it started to look like?
Go on then. Hit them with it.
Okay, so we have got the end of the session here down the line compared. So definitely better on the balance points across the feet. And then the big bit was how much we were starting to turn those hips. So we could see that those hips were loading and turning, and the difference in where the arms are relative to the body.
Yeah. And this was fascinating because this was not thinking about the arms. This was solely based on what I was doing with the hips. And it literally felt here that I was swinging about halfway back and that my right hip was almost hitting the floor. It felt that deep and that behind me. It was unbelievable. And it was just so fascinating. And there's lots of other stuff that's going on within this swing that does need to change, that does need to alter. But what I was doing at Impact was very much initiated in a problem by what I was doing in my backswing.
Absolutely.
So again, this fix first is the first key.
So we could see that the right shoulder's a little high there at Impact. Even this new one, it's definitely a lot lower down there.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Footwork's obviously a little bit different already. Right elbow's more bent because the shoulder's more down, so it doesn't need to have as much flick through the golf ball with the hands.
Which is something I've been working on as well. I mean, that last swing there, that wasn't my best strike, but it was my most exaggerated.
Yeah.
And it was crazy.
So from your setup, you can see a big difference in the feet.
Yeah.
So obviously this was the square foot, which obviously really meant that the weight was staying very much towards the toes throughout the swing. This one here, we've got the foot flared, and then with the flared foot now we can see huge difference here at the top of that backswing. How much more behind the ball we are at that top of the swing in comparison.
And again, it's that crazy thing. I literally fell on my new swing like I was almost halfway to the car park. I was that far behind the ball. It felt like, to me, it was unbelievable. But then when you play it back on video, when you play it back in the 3D, it's just so different.
Yeah.
And I think the key here, and whenever you do have a golf lesson, this is so important. It's something that both me and Dan really do stress. Yes, it looks better, but the key is, what is this going to do?
Yeah.
Because just having a pretty looking swing, you'll know that.
Yeah.
See the tour boys, it doesn't mean anything unless that ball's going to be a better strike. So
absolutely.
From a change like this, what can we be expecting to see?
So obviously we know that you've had that little bit of extension in the right wrist, and the club's kind of tended to change direction a little bit too much. The big thing that we're expecting to see from this is, first thing, over time we'll get a bit more distance. Okay, it's going to be less stressful on the body, which is another good one. And then the big one's going to be that I think the top of your back gets very rounded through the ball. Okay, so this is kind of, we'd see it in this original one here. So we got right shoulder very high. You can see now without us even doing anything on that downswing, that right shoulder's a lot lower down. So we're starting to see some quite big changes. Just to give you an idea, here's how it was looking at the end on the 3D. So obviously we said it was only 1 degree away at impact, so we can see much less movement towards the target in the backswing. That's something we need to work out a little more. But here's the big bit. At impact, like 4 degrees away from the target. So it's only 3, but we've not even looked at that.
Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't the thing that we looked at the most. This is the bit that's pleased us both the most, is the amount the shoulders are turning. So as we get about halfway back here, halfway back in the backswing, we're at 49 degrees of hip turn compared to 32. Okay,
Like I say, it felt like 149 degrees. That's the exaggeration, really.
and we could see, so that's max out there, is shoulder turn at 95 as opposed to mid 80s, so there's a lot more coil. And then the position of the pelvis, so this is all going to give us more space because the hip turn's going to leave room for the arms, okay, which will mean that therefore with less kind of need to flip the hands at impact to square the club because there'll be more room to deliver it. We'll have the body won't be having to change its angle, so that's going to be more reliable and obviously give more consistency, but better, not hurting the back. And then lastly, for me, what it's going to be able to do is it means that under pressure, it's not going to have the big miss, because what we'd see is that because the shoulder stays high, the hand has to extend. If we think this is the starting one on the right hand side from down the line, if that shoulder stays high where it is now at impact, it has to extend that right arm to reach the ball, because otherwise you top it. Okay, so the more you'd have a passive fate, I think the strike would start to get a little bit more bottom groovy. But also, you said at the start that you take divots that are pretty substantial.
Yes. they're not classed as divots anymore. It's just carpets. Big rolls of carpet.
That the turf company want to like buy
Yes,
off you and sell for
absolutely.
people's back gardens.
Very rarely invited back to a course for a block.
So we can already see here that because of the movement we're getting, we're definitely seeing the difference in the shoulder. So what we're going to do is going to have a couple of sessions at getting that backswing where we want it to, and then start to move into transition. I think the impact will very quickly start to change itself.
Yes, that's the hope, because we were saying before, actually, some points of my impact, it was actually quite good, but because of the positions I was getting into prior to impact, the amount of change that I had to effect just before I hit the ball was massive, and that's going to breed a hell of a lot of inconsistency. So it was, fascinating. It's now just up to me to work hard and get ready for the next lesson, which I tell everyone to do. So I'm definitely going to have to do it. Right, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hopefully you found that interesting. Please comment below, as always. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hop over and subscribe to Dan as well. Everything's linked in the description below. Right then, let's get to the range.